My name is Lily Harmon. I'm 34. I live in Portland, Oregon, in an apartment that's a little too small and smells like cat food no matter what candle I burn. And for a long time that apartment was the safest place I had ever been in my entire life. I know that sounds like a weird thing to say about a 600 square foot apartment with a broken dishwasher. But when you grow up the way I grew up, safe stops meaning what the dictionary says it means. Safe becomes quiet. Safe becomes no one is looking at you wrong. Safe becomes you can eat dinner without calculating whether you've taken up too much space at the table. I found out in a parking garage last April that my grandmother had left me everything she owned. I was sitting in my car, just sitting there, engine off, phone in my hand, and I kept reading the attorney's email over and over because I couldn't get the numbers to make sense. The farmhouse, the land, the accounts, all of it. And then I put my phone face down on the passenger seat and I just fell apart. In a parking garage, for a very long time. Not because of the money, although I won't pretend the money didn't matter. Because of why she did it. Because of what she'd been doing for 22 years without telling me. I've gone back and forth about whether to share this. I'm a pretty private person by nature, and honestly this story makes my family look bad, and even now, even after everything, some part of me still flinches at that. Still wants to protect them, which is its own kind of messed up, and maybe you already understand what I mean by that. But I think this story matters. I think some of you need to hear it. So, let me go back to the beginning. I grew up in Millbrook, Ohio. It's a small town. The kind where everybody's business is everybody else's business except when it isn't, and the line between those two things is always moving depending on who's asking. My dad ran a hardware store. My mom did part-time bookkeeping and spent most of her energy on the version of our family she presented to the outside world. Which was fine. Polished. Matching Christmas card, the whole thing. I have one older brother, Daniel. He's 2 years older than me, and from the time I was old enough to understand what attention was, I understood that Daniel got most of it and I got what was left. Which most days wasn't much. I want to be fair here because I spent years telling myself I was being dramatic. Kids misread things. Kids feel slighted over nothing. I really genuinely tried to believe that for a long time. And then I went home when I was 29 to help clean out my parents' basement, and I found the bin of photos. It was just a regular plastic bin, the kind you get at Target. And it was stuffed full of printed photographs, the old glossy kind, the ones from disposable cameras and Walgreens photo development. Birthdays, Christmases, Thanksgivings, vacations to the lake, to Florida, to Hocking Hills. Daniel's little league. Daniel's prom. Daniel's graduation. Easter mornings with baskets on the kitchen table. 4th of July in the backyard. Years and years and years of our family's life, printed out and kept. I sat down on the concrete floor and I went through every single one. I am in 11 photographs. 11. Out of close to 400. And in 8 of those 11 I'm cut off. Partially. Like the person taking the photo started to include me and then didn't. Shifted the frame just enough. Got everyone they needed. There's a Christmas morning picture from 2002. I know the exact date because it's written on the back in my mom's handwriting. I was 7. I remember that morning. I remember the green carpet in our living room and the specific way our tree blinked, slow and then fast and then slow again. And I remember my dad's coffee smell and being so excited I'd barely slept. I was there. I was absolutely there. In the photo it's my mom, my dad, and Daniel. All in their pajamas laughing at the camera. The tree behind them. Gifts everywhere. I am not in it. I'm not out of focus in the corner. I'm not mid-movement, caught at a bad angle. I'm just not there. Like I wasn't in the house that morning. I held that photo for a while. And then I did something I'd spent 29 years conditioning myself not to do. I brought it up. I found my mom upstairs sorting a box of Daniel's baseball trophies. And I said as carefully as I could, "Hey, how come I'm barely in any of these pictures?" She glanced at the photo. Barely a second. Then she shrugged and said, "You were always running around somewhere. You never liked to sit still." And she went back to the trophies. That was it. That was the whole conversation. I went back downstairs. Sat down on the concrete. Kept going through the bin. By the time I got to the bottom, something had shifted in me that I don't think has fully shifted back. Because I realized, not for the first time but for the first time with evidence in my hands, That what I had felt my entire childhood was not paranoia. It was not me being dramatic. It was not a misread. It was real. I had been left out. Deliberately. Consistently. For longer than I'd been alive. I don't want to just list things. Because when you list things it sounds like you're building a case, and that's not exactly what this is. But I need you to understand the texture of it, the everyday ordinary weight of being the wrong child in a family. Daniel got new clothes every August for back to school. I wore hand-me-downs and clearance rack finds. We weren't poor, my dad had a steady income, we owned our house. But Daniel had a new winter coat every year and I wore his old ones, always too big, always a little wrong, until I got old enough to babysit and buy my own. Every single one of Daniel's school events, his plays, his games, his awards, my parents were there. Front row or close to it. My mom brought a camera. I did choir in 5th grade. We had one concert right before Christmas in the school gymnasium. I stood on the second riser from the front. I remember looking out into the audience before we started scanning faces, doing that thing where you're telling yourself you don't care but you're still looking. They weren't there. My mom told me afterward she'd written it on the wrong week in her planner. One concert. One time I was on a stage. They forgot. When Daniel got into Ohio State, my parents threw a real party. Catered food, 30 guests, my mom made a banner. An actual banner, that said, Daniel's going to be somebody. I was 15. I stood on a chair and helped tape it up. When I graduated high school as salutatorian, second in my class, valedictorian was a kid named Marcus who deserved it. My parents came because that's what you do. Afterward we drove to Applebee's. My dad said, "Good job, kiddo." My mom ordered the half rack of ribs. On the drive home my dad called Daniel to talk about his summer internship. I sat in the back seat and looked out the window and did the math. Here is what I eventually understood, and what took me years of therapy to fully articulate. My parents weren't cruel in the way that's visible. They didn't hit. They didn't call me names. There was nothing that would have made a school counselor pick up the phone. What they did was quieter than that. And in some ways harder to survive. They just didn't include me. In the narrative of our family, I was there physically. I ate at the table. I slept in the house. But in the story they told themselves about who we were, I was a supporting character at best. An extra more often. And when you grow up as the extra in your own family story, you develop this very specific skill set. You learn to need nothing. You learn to shrink. You learn that wanting things and not getting them is more painful than just quietly deciding you didn't want them in the first place. I learned all of that by the time I was 12. If you've been in a family like this, and some of you watching this right now have, you already feel what I'm describing. You don't need me to explain it. You're nodding. And I want you to keep watching because I promise the part that's coming is the part that matters. My grandmother's name was Ruth Harmon. She was my dad's mother. She was 5'2" and had silver hair she kept pinned up in these dark, sharp eyes that made you feel like she was reading you before you'd said a word. She lived about 40 minutes from us in a farmhouse that always smelled like lavender and vanilla, and something baking even when nothing was actually in the oven. Grandma Ruth came to every single school event I ever had. Not most of them. Every one. Every choir concert. Every honor roll ceremony. Every time my name got read aloud for something, she was in the audience. She kept a scrapbook. I found out when I was 9. She showed me a new page she'd added. A little program from my 3rd grade spring concert with a note in her handwriting that said, "Lily. Front row." Sang every single word. At 9 I thought that was just something grandmothers did. I had no idea she had more than one scrapbook. But I'm getting there. Calling her my lifeline sounds dramatic. But she was. When the air at home got too thick, and it did regularly, she always picked up the phone. She never told me I was overreacting. She never said families are complicated, or, you should try to understand their perspective. In that way people say it when they don't want to deal with the truth of what you're telling them. She just listened. And then sometimes she'd say something like, "Lily, some people don't know what they have right in front of them. You hold on to yourself, okay? Whatever else happens, you make sure you hold on to yourself." I didn't understand that when I was 12. I thought it was generic grandmother wisdom, the kind you nod at and file away. I understand it now. There was a habit she had that I noticed but never thought hard about. When I'd tell her something that had happened, something small, usually something I'd been carrying for a while, she'd get this very particular look. Her jaw would tighten just slightly. She'd ask a few follow-up questions, careful ones, specific ones. And then she'd reach for the small notebook she kept on her kitchen table and write something down. I assumed she was just a journaler. A lot of older women are. She was building a record. 22 years of one. I left Ohio the week after my 22nd birthday. A friend of a friend had mentioned an entry-level accounting opening in Portland. It wasn't glamorous. The pay was barely enough. But Portland was 2,000 miles from Millbrook, and that felt more important than any of the other numbers. The night before I left, Daniel and his girlfriend Sarah came over and my mom made lasagna and we all sat around the table and it was fine. The way things in our family were always technically fine. Nothing obviously wrong, no one being openly unkind, but I sat there and felt the thing I'd been feeling my whole life, which is that I was a guest at my own family's dinner table. We talked about Daniel's promotion. We talked about Sarah's sister's new baby. At some point my mom asked if Portland was far. I said yes. She said, "Well, don't get too used to it in case it doesn't work out." I looked at her for a second. Don't get too used to it. I got into my U-Haul the next morning before anyone else was awake. I didn't leave a note. I just drove. The first couple 100 miles I cried. Ugly, messy, the kind of crying that feels like it's coming from somewhere lower than your chest. And then somewhere around the Indiana border something changed. Quietly. Like a switch I hadn't known needed flipping finally clicked over. I felt relief. Real clean, something loosening relief. Portland was hard at first and then it wasn't. I got better at my job. I found people who actually wanted to be around me, which I want to tell you sounds obvious but felt radical honestly. I started therapy, and if you grew up in a house that taught you your feelings were inconvenient, therapy is not optional, it's infrastructure. My therapist was the first person who said the words emotional neglect to me. I remember that session. I remember the light in her office and the particular chair I was sitting in. Naming it made it real in a way I hadn't been prepared for. And I cried for the entire 50 minutes and then sat in my car for another 20. I kept in touch with Grandma Ruth. Every Sunday without fail. She wanted to know about my cats, Tuesday and Fig, who she'd met once and declared characters. And whether I was eating real food and whether I'd found a good library. She sent birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside even when I was 32 years old and did not need $20. I kept every card. My parents and I existed in a group text and occasional holiday calls. Daniel reached out when he wanted something. An opinion once alone which I gave him which was never repaid. My mom called around Thanksgiving and Christmas in the way you call to cross something off a list. And I was genuinely okay. Or close enough. But the moments still got me sometimes. That's the thing no one tells you about surviving a family like this. You do the work, you build the life, and then something small slips through anyway and it catches you sideways. Like Daniel's wedding in 2018. I was not in the wedding party. Not even as a reader. I sat in the third row in a blue dress that cost more than I should have spent. And I watched 7 of Sarah's friends stand at the altar. 7. And I thought, I am his only sibling. His only one. And I'm in the third row. I'm in the official wedding photo from that day. Barely. Edge of the frame. Partially cut off. Some patterns are just very, very old. In 2020, Grandma Ruth was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. She told me on a Sunday call, same steady voice she used for everything. Then she said something that I tucked away and didn't fully examine until much later. She said, "I'm not afraid, Lily. I've had a full life. But I need you to know that I've made sure everything is in order. I've taken care of you." I thought she meant her china set. Maybe a piece of her jewelry. I said not to worry about me. We talked about her garden. She was still gardening, which was extremely her. And when she started sounding tired, I let her go. She passed 18 months later. In her own house, in her own bed, the way she would have wanted. I flew back for the funeral. I didn't know yet what I was flying back to. It was a Tuesday in April. That specific kind of spring day that Ohio specializes in where the sky can't commit. Gray light. Cold wind with a little warmth underneath it. The ground still soft in patches. The church was full. Grandma Ruth had been part of that community for decades and it showed. There were her garden club women in their good coats, her church choir friends, neighbors who'd known her since before my dad was born. My parents sat in the front row. Dad, Mom, Daniel, Sarah. I sat 2 rows back, next to Uncle Greg, who I hadn't been in the same room with in probably 15 years. He put his arm around my shoulders without saying anything first, and then after a second he said quietly, "She talked about you all the time. She was so proud of everything you did." I had to look at the stained glass for a minute. After the graveside service there was a reception at a family friend's house nearby. I spent most of it standing with a plate of food I kept moving around without eating, doing the quiet people watching that funerals turn everyone into. And then my dad found me. He looked different. Not just grieving. Something else under the grief. A tightness, a behind-the-eyes calculation that I recognized because I'd watched him do it at every family inflection point my whole life. He said there was a reading of the will on Thursday. He said I needed to be there. And then, and this is the part that made the back of my neck go cold, he said, "Did she talk to you? About her estate, I mean. Specifically." "Not specifically," I said. "She said she'd gotten things in order." He nodded. His jaw was doing that thing. "She had significant assets. The property, the house, some accounts. I've been managing her finances this past year, so I have a sense of the numbers." He said it casually, like it was just information. Like it wasn't a strange thing to say to me, at his mother's funeral reception, while I was holding a plate of untouched casserole. I said okay, because I didn't have another word. He went to find my mom. Greg appeared at my elbow. "I got a call too," he said very quietly. "Thursday." We looked at each other. Neither of us said anything else. But something moved between us in that look, something neither of us could name yet. Thursday morning. The office of Harold Weiss, attorney at law, who I would later learn had been my grandmother's trusted advisor for over 30 years, and who she had specifically chosen, I think, because he had the calm, unshakable energy of someone who has seen every version of human drama and is not impressed by any of it. 6 people in the room. My parents. Daniel and Sarah. Uncle Greg. Me. Mr. Weiss sat across from us and he had the specific professional stillness of someone who knows exactly what's in the document he's about to read and has already braced for the room's reaction. He had a folder. He had individual envelopes, one in front of each of us. He said Ruth Harmon had prepared the will with, quote, "great care and considerable intentionality," and that she'd asked him to read the primary document aloud before distributing the individual letter she'd written for each person present. My dad sat slightly forward. He'd been doing math since Tuesday. Mr. Weiss read. Ruth Harmon's estate, the farmhouse, the 12 acres of land surrounding it, her savings and investment accounts totaling approximately $680,000, was to be distributed as follows. The farmhouse and property, Lily Harmon. The savings and investment accounts, Lily Harmon. A sum of $10,000, Gregory Harmon. With a letter. Robert and Carol Harmon. A letter. No financial bequest. Daniel Harmon. A letter. No financial bequest. There was a silence in that room that I have never heard the equal of. And then my dad said very quietly, "That can't be right." Mr. Weiss looked at him over his glasses. He didn't have the energy of someone bracing for a fight. He had the energy of someone who has already won one he isn't interested in having. "It is correct. Ruth revised this will 3 years ago. It was notarized and witnessed through this office. I have full documentation of her capacity at the time of revision." My mother made a sound. Just a sound. Somewhere between a word and not. Daniel said. "She left everything to Lily? Not my sister. Not Robert's daughter. Just my name. Like I was some stranger who'd wandered into the wrong building." I couldn't say anything. I was sitting completely still with my hands in my lap, and my heart was doing something I'd never felt before. Not racing exactly, but enormous. Like it was trying to figure out if this was something to run from or toward. Mr. Weiss was still talking. He said there were additional materials. Not just the letters. And here he did pause, genuinely, just briefly, and he placed a bound folder on the table directly in front of me and said, "Your grandmother asked me to tell you this folder contains documentation she compiled over approximately 22 years. She asked that you review it privately, at your discretion, and make whatever decisions you feel are appropriate with the contents." My dad's voice went sharp. "What documentation? I'm not at liberty to discuss Lily's private materials." Ruth was specific. She was my mother. Robert. Just his name. Just that. Mr. Weiss didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Ruth was clear. I'm honoring her wishes. We were given our individual letters. I watched my parents open theirs. I watched my dad's face cycle through red and then something paler and then something I didn't have a word for. My mother's hand came up slowly and covered her mouth. I held my own envelope and didn't open it in that room. I wasn't ready to cry in front of them. Not yet. I drove to my childhood home where I was staying for the trip, and I went upstairs to the room that had always been called the guest room, even when I still lived there, even when I was 15 and it was technically my bedroom, and I sat on the edge of the bed and I opened the letter. 4 pages. Her handwriting, which slanted slightly to the right and had gotten a little shakier in the last years but was still unmistakably hers. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but I'll tell you some of it because I think you need to understand who she was. She wrote that her only regret was that she hadn't been stronger when I was small. She wrote that she watched what happened in that house for years and told herself it would change, that my father would see it, that my mother's heart would open. She wrote that it didn't happen and she was sorry she hadn't done more. She wrote, I want you to know that I saw you. Every concert, every award, every hard thing you survived and every quiet way you kept going. I saw all of it. The folder is the record. I needed there to be a record. I needed someone to prove that you were real and that what was done to you was real. What I am leaving you is not a reward for suffering. Please don't think of it that way. It is a statement. You were the child in that family who asked for nothing and deserved everything. This is me from wherever I am now, finally giving some of it back. I put the letter down. I just sat there for a long time. And then I cried in a way that I hadn't cried since, maybe ever. The kind of crying that doesn't have a shape. The kind that's been waiting a very long time to get out. When I could breathe again, I opened the folder. She had kept dated journals. Not diary-style rambling, these were precise. Factual. Short entries with dates. Things like, March 12, 2001. Lily's 3rd grade spring concert. Robert and Carol absent. Lily front row sang without error. I spoke with her after. She said, I knew you'd come, Grandma. I took a photograph. June 4, 2007. Lily's end-of-year honor roll ceremony, 6th grade. Highest academic achievement in her class. Parents told Lily they had a prior engagement. I attended. Lily looked for them in the audience. I cannot describe her face when she didn't find them. I will not forget it. August 2013. Lily left for Portland. No farewell dinner was held. No photograph taken. Robert told me Lily preferred it low-key. I called Lily that evening. She said, I just wanted it to be a big deal. Just once. She cried. She didn't know I was writing any of this down. Entry after entry after entry. 22 years. She also had photographs, her own archive, parallel to the one in my parents' basement. Every event she'd attended. And Christmas morning pictures, taken in her own kitchen, on the years she'd made a point to see me separately. There's one from 2002, same Christmas, same morning as the one in that bin where I don't exist. I'm 7. I'm holding a small gift she'd brought me. I'm laughing at something off to the side. I am completely in frame. Not cut off. Not half there. All the way present. There were financial records too. She built a comparison document year by year of what my parents had spent on Daniel versus what they'd spent on me. Private tutoring. A car at 16. A down payment loan on his first house. I don't know how she'd gotten those numbers. I don't know who helped her. But it was all there, documented, dated, organized. At the very back of the folder was a single typed page. Statement of intent. It described, in plain and careful language, what she had observed over more than 2 decades. She used the phrase consistent pattern of preferential treatment and deliberate exclusion. She said she was making her bequest as both practical support and moral statement. She said she hoped all parties would use their individual letters to reflect honestly on the choices they had made. She was 81 years old. She was the most precise and purposeful person I have ever known. My parents came that evening. I was sitting on Grandma Ruth's porch, which I keep having to remind myself is my porch now, which still doesn't quite feel like language I have the right to use, watching the sun go down over the back field. It was still cold. I had her old wool blanket over my lap, the one she'd had on that porch as long as I could remember. I heard the gravel. I want to be honest, my stomach dropped. 25 years of conditioning doesn't evaporate in a Thursday morning. Some part of me went right back to being 12 years old, sitting at a table waiting to find out how much space I was allowed to take up. My dad got out first. My mom stayed a half step behind him the way she does when she's not sure how a conversation is going to go, and wants the option to not be in it. "We need to talk about the will," he said. "Okay." He sat down in the chair across from me. He looked old suddenly. Tired. Something had gone out of him in that attorney's office that I hadn't seen leave before. He said he didn't understand why she did it. I said I thought he did. He was quiet for a second. Then, "We provided for you. You had a home. You went to school. I needed to be in the Christmas photos, Dad." My voice came out steady, which surprised me. "I needed you to show up to one concert. I needed you to make it a big deal, even once when I did something right." My mom said, "Lily, we did the best." "I know you think that," I said. "And I meant that. I genuinely believe they think that." But Grandma Ruth spent 22 years watching what was happening. She wrote it all down. She rewrote her entire will over it. That's not nothing. That's the opposite of nothing. Silence. My dad's jaw was working. "The house," he started. "The property alone. I know what it's worth," I said. "I'm not selling it." "Lily." His voice had an edge now. "This isn't fair. She had no right to. She had every right." I said it quietly, firmly, and something loosened in me as I said it. Some very old, very tired knot. "She was your mother. That was her money and her house and her life. And she chose what she chose. And I'm going to respect it. You could contest it." I looked at him for a moment. "I'm not going to," I said. "But if you decide to, you should know that I have 22 years of documentation compiled by a meticulous woman who loved me very carefully for my entire life. I'd rather not use it. But I will if that's where this goes." My father sat there. For the first time in my entire life, he didn't have anything to say. My mother started crying. Real tears, and I want to be clear, I don't think they were for show. I think she felt something in that moment that she maybe hadn't let herself feel before. I watched her cry and I felt something complicated. Not cold. Not victorious. Just tired. The way you feel after carrying something heavy for so long that when you finally put it down you don't feel light, you just feel how tired you were. She said, "I did love you. I do. I believe you," I said. "I believe you believe it." They left after a while. At 11 p.m., Daniel texted me. For words. "This is so wrong." I put my phone in a drawer. Some things don't need an answer. It's been 14 months since that Thursday. I kept the farmhouse. I'm not living in it full time. Portland is still my home, still my life. Tuesday and Fig are still on my bed every morning, but I go back. Every few weeks, sometimes more. I've been going through her things slowly, the way you do when you're not ready to finish. There are boxes I've been sitting with for months, reading her handwriting on the backs of photographs, opening recipe cards with her notes in the margins that say things like, "Add more vanilla than it says," and "This is better the next day." Every room in that house is evidence that someone saw me. Learning to let that in has been its own kind of work. Uncle Greg and I are close now. Actually close. He told me after the will reading that he'd known in a general sense what my parents were doing, that Grandma Ruth had talked to him near the end, that she'd wanted at least one other person to witness. He cried when he told me that. We were in her kitchen and he just put his face in his hands and said, "I should have done more when you were little. I should have stepped in. I'm sorry." I told him he hadn't fully known. He said knowing and doing something were two different problems. He's not wrong. But I've forgiven him. I needed to. My parents and I still talk. I want to be honest about that. I didn't cut them off and I'm not sure I ever will, not completely. The relationship is thin and a little effortful, and some of our phone calls end with me sitting quietly by myself for longer than I should probably admit. But I've stopped trying to get from them what they couldn't give me when I was 7 years old. That want is still there, somewhere underneath. But I'm not leading with it anymore. That's what 14 months of this looks like. It's not a transformation. It's a practice. Daniel and I don't speak. He sent me a longer message a few months back, part grievance, part guilt, the kind of thing that costs someone something to write even if it lands wrong. I read it. I put my phone down. I made tea. I thought about what Grandma Ruth would say. I think she'd say, some things just need to be survived. Not solved. Not answered. Just survived. I've been thinking about why I wanted to share this. Because it's not a revenge story exactly. I didn't do anything. I didn't plan anything. I just lived my life as well as I could, and my grandmother watched, and she decided that watching wasn't enough anymore. What she did for me was name it. She kept a record that said, this happened. This girl was here. This was done to her, and it was not nothing, and someone noticed. I think a lot of people go through their whole lives without ever getting that. Without anyone saying, I saw it. I saw what you survived. Here is the proof that you weren't crazy, that you weren't dramatic, that the thing you felt your whole life was real. If you're watching this right now and you recognize yourself in this story, not necessarily the details but the feeling, I want to say something to you. You don't need a will reading to make it real. You don't need a folder of documentation. What happened to you was real because you felt it, because it shaped you, because you're still carrying pieces of it around with you right now. And maybe no one in your family is going to hand you a bound folder with 22 years of proof inside. Maybe you're going to have to be your own witness. Maybe you have to be the one who decides, my life happened. I was here. I mattered in the rooms I walked through, even in the rooms where people worked hard not to see me. The record exists because I exist. I'm still learning how to believe that. But I'm in the photos now. In every single one. And if you've been through something that this touched, even a corner of it, leave a comment. I read them. I want to know what got you through, or what you're still working on getting through, or what your version of Grandma Ruth looked like. Because she's out there. Somewhere. Someone who is quietly watching, quietly keeping record. And they see you too.